There are fairies on the farm.
Check out my fairy fantasy novel, The Ghosts of Nothing. It's the perfect scary fairy story for Halloween. To learn more, click the link in the description. This happened in England, Hampshire, in the 90s. I was around 10 at the time. My friend, Male, and I were sitting at the edge of a field on the outskirts of our village. It was evening, fairly dark. We could see across the field to a footpath which connected our village to another hamlet a couple of miles away. We were sitting there chatting when we both noticed movement amongst the scrubby trees lining the footpath. At first, I assumed it was a dog walker, but very quickly I realized it was not. A thing was walking along the footpath toward our village. It was as tall as the trees. I would guess 18 to 20 feet tall, but it was a humanoid figure, dark as shadows but solid. Its arms hung down, reaching to its knees, and it was slightly stooped at the shoulders. Both I and my friends saw this thing clearly. It turned toward us, and even from that distance, I saw that its eyes were red. I don't know how we could both see it so clearly from across a field, but we did. Its presence felt malevolent. My friend and I looked at each other as if to confirm that we could both see this monster. And then we ran down the lane to our separate homes as fast as I ever ran in my life. I still live in the area, and even as an adult, I do not walk on that path after dark. Perhaps what I saw was not a fairy, but it certainly wasn't something I could categorize as anything else but simply monster. It had nothing human about it, and I remember being filled with terror upon seeing it. It wasn't a ghost, it didn't seem like a spirit, but a very tangible physical thing. And unlike an alien, it was not out of place in the Hampshire countryside. It seemed to belong there. If anything, it was like we were intruding on its privacy. I think fairies are a very old race of beings, part of the land. This happened about 10 years ago. I was around 12 or 13. I was out for a walk in the woods round my house, and I heard some weird music coming from deeper in the forest. Curious as to what this was, I followed the sound and found what I thought were children dancing round to the music. I still couldn't find where the music was coming from, and I was confused as to why these small children were out here dancing by themselves. I moved closer to them and slowly began to realize that their faces were not the faces of children. They had horrible, old, wizened faces and cruel eyes. I reacted instinctively and screamed. They all turned to look at me, and the music instantly stopped. Suddenly, these creatures all seemed to shrink. They were tiny, much smaller than hand-sized, and then they all ran at me, screaming. Their voices were clanky and high-pitched. I froze in fear, closed my eyes, and screamed. Nothing happened. I opened my eyes, scrambling backward, but they were gone. I turned round and round, looking in every direction, but I was alone. I ran all the way home and didn't look back. In this area where I live, there are lots of stories about pixies, so I assumed that's what they were. And they just felt like pixies, nasty little pixies, not like ghosts or aliens, and there's no such thing as angels. What are fairies? Horrible monsters as far as I'm concerned. My one and only experience with them was horrible, just horrible, and I never want to repeat it. I own some land in England, Hampshire. I have ancestral connections with this land, and it's very important to me to keep it in the family. Unfortunately, I have been dealing with a legal battle with a greedy land developer who has been trying to take this inheritance away from me. I won't get into the details, but it's been a stressful experience. I feel a strong connection with the land and a deep need to protect it and preserve it. Much of it is still wild, beautiful, and, I believe, haunted. In fact, I've had my fair share of ghost sightings on the property, but this one night, it was different. I was out driving along the outskirts of the land, checking on the property. The area I was driving was very wild, and it was quite dark. It had been a long day, and I decided to park to just sit and gather my thoughts. So I was sat there thinking about various stressors when suddenly there was a loud knock on the hood of the car. It was like someone was out there trying to get my attention. My immediate reaction was surprise and disbelief. There was a person out there in the woods in the dark? How is this even possible? I looked up and saw a tall, gangly limbed, shadowy being with a pointed head. Possibly it was wearing a hat, I'm not sure. It lurched in front of the car and then disappeared into the bushes. I've never seen anything like it before or since. I don't know what it was, but I'm sure it wasn't human. I don't know the source of these encounters, only that to this day they remain unexplained. The first was when I was 6 years old, before I moved to Ponce, Puerto Rico, and had chickens as pets. They were so close they even watched TV with me. One morning, when I went to open their cage, I found that all but one were dead, and the one that was alive was barely hanging on. The birds all had these grotesque circular wounds under their wings, but no blood was visible whatsoever. The adults kept me away from the chickens after that, but no one could explain what happened to them. This incident predates the infamous Mocha vampire incident, in which residents of the town of Mocha found their livestock slain in a grisly fashion by an unknown attacker. Decades later, the even more infamous Chupacabra was said to have killed as many as 150 farm animals and pets across Puerto Rico. The lack of blood reported on the animals and the small circular wounds are very similar to what I saw on the chickens that day. The other encounter I had was around the mid to late 90s in Ponce, after around 2 a.m., as me and my brothers had just finished playing Jet Moto 2 on my younger brother's PlayStation. I and one of my brothers had gone out to the balcony while our younger brother had gone to bed. We were standing out there chatting when suddenly we heard this horrendously loud howl, as if a wolf was howling through a giant loudspeaker at full blast. The sound was so loud it went right through us and made the windows rattle. I could feel it in my bones. My brother and I stared silently at each other for a long, shocked moment. Then my brother tried to come up with all sorts of explanations to rationalize it. He said it was a dog, the neighbor's dog, a coyote, but none of these explanations were satisfactory, and I can tell that he didn't really believe them either. The next day, my younger brother, who had gone to bed when the sound occurred, said he remembered hearing it as he was falling asleep. He mentioned it to us without either of us bringing it up. That's how loud and strange it had been. I never want to hear that sound again, whatever it was. I don't know if these experiences are connected or if either of them are related to fairies, but I believe whatever these things were, they were some sort of interdimensional beings, much like the Fae. As far as I know, animal mutilation has been associated with the Fae in ancient human history, so maybe there's a connection. As for that bone-chilling howl we heard, who knows? I was around 16, my brother was 14 at the time. We were the only ones at home. My mother and stepfather were out. I was walking toward the kitchen when I saw this tall man standing in there next to the table. I stopped in my tracks. The man was over 6 feet tall and wearing plain brown robes of rough woven cloth and had long white hair. I knew somehow it wasn't human. My brother came up behind me and saw the being too. He thought at first it was our stepfather and said our stepfather's name. But the moment my brother spoke, the being disappeared in the blink of an eye. We were both frightened by the encounter and spoke about it afterward, but today my brother won't talk about it with me since he's had children and he's worried speaking about it might attract the being and threaten the children's safety. Since then, I've had visits that last no more than a few fleeting moments by similar guests. When I was approximately 22, after I dropped out of college and moved back into my mother's house, I was alone for the weekend and watching TV. It was around 3 p.m. The lighting was partial with the curtains being slightly drawn. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a hand creeping out from the hallway and reaching toward the molding. A head slowly followed. I froze as this thing began to emerge from the hallway. I instinctively knew not to look directly at it, but I could make out all the features through my peripheral vision. It had an oblong-shaped head that was no more than 36 inches and was wearing a hat that was too small for its head. And it had a symmetrical fold to the left. Its eyes were large, and the iris and pupils were indistinguishably dark. It wore rough cloth that was a muddy green, and it was smiling. Its smile was extremely wide with crooked, slightly yellowed teeth that almost looked sharp because of the way they lay. Its smile I can only describe as one of sinister mirth. I felt chills all over my body, and then it vanished. Things started going missing shortly after that, and I've spotted him on and off watching me, smiling at me out of the corner of my eye on several different occasions. I've yelled at him a few times, and once he opened all the cupboards in the kitchen, I believe in retaliation. I've also noticed that his appearance in my life tends to correspond with a rash of bad luck or missing objects. When I was 26, I moved out of that house to live with a new boyfriend. I hoped that being in a new place, I wouldn't see the smiling man again. But not long after we moved in, I saw something. It wasn't the smiling man, but a small, darting form that looked like a monkey. I got pretty worked up about it because it had looked so real. I think my boyfriend thought I was losing it. Eventually, I saw the thing again darting past the fireplace, and this time I glimpsed the face. It looked like a little hairy man, much like popular depictions of Bigfoot, except maybe 11 inches tall and gray. I've seen this little man on and off ever since. I'm 33 now, and I still see the little man occasionally in a thicket of roses and ferns in my garden. As for the smiling man, I just saw him last week, and I'm worried about what it means, what's about to go wrong in my life. I don't know if some kind of entity has attached itself to me and is appearing in these two different forms, or if I'm dealing with two completely separate beings. Judging by the way they both blink in and out of reality, I think they might be interdimensional creatures. Also, on more than one occasion, I've noticed ripples in the air before I see them, almost as if there's a gossamer curtain in front of me. I've also heard things from time to time that sound like whispers, but I can never make out what's being said. There are Native American myths about these little hairy men in the area. They call them water babies because they lure you with the cry of a baby and drown you. But I've never heard anything like that, so I don't think it's the same thing. I do believe there are many different races of fairies, so it's possible I'm dealing with two separate beings. But I've also read fairies are capable of shape-shifting, so who knows? Either way, I wish I could know more about them and what I've done to attract them into my life. I'd really rather they left me in peace, but I don't know how to stop them from appearing or encourage them to lose their interest in me and move on. If anyone has some advice, I'd like to know. Now, this isn't a long story, but it's stayed with me for most of my life. It happened when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I had gone to Kmart with my family. I remember sitting in the cart and facing the aisle where the Christmas trees were. I was looking around and realized that things had gone unusually quiet, and there was no one else around, which was weird because it had been busy when we first arrived. It was almost Christmas. I remember looking around and feeling confused and a bit scared because I couldn't see anyone, not even my family. Then I saw this being step out from behind one of the Christmas tree aisles. It was a really dark shadow, about 2 to 3 feet tall. I couldn't see any features, but it did look like it was wearing a pointy hat. Despite not having any facial features that I could see, I felt that it was turning toward me, and I could just feel it staring at me. I got really frightened. The being then turned and walked quickly back into the aisle it had emerged from, and soon I couldn't see it anymore. The next thing I remember, my mom was pushing the cart again, and the store seemed loud and busy once more. I don't know how to explain what happened. I wasn't asleep or dreaming. It felt real, and it's always stayed with me. It's a disturbing memory for me. It's what ultimately fueled my desire to learn about fairies and other beings as an adult. I've actually debated for years now whether or not to share this story with you. At first, I wondered if maybe others have had the same experience, or maybe by sharing my story, I'd be provided with some answers or clarity. Then I realized my true reason for hesitating was because, in some way, this story has become entangled in a very complicated and unhappy childhood that I didn't necessarily want to recount. When I was a child, my family, which included me, my parents, and my two older brothers, lived in a house in a small village high in the Rocky Mountains and bordering a national forest. It was just a couple of miles from a wilderness reserve. Yes, the area is wooded and rather rural. My father grew up in this village, and he would sometimes tell my brother and I stories of fairies in the woods, or duendes, as he would call them. He told us a priest had discovered them in the woods when the town was first founded in the mid 1700s, and that my father himself had encountered them when he was a boy. One of my brothers is very close to me in age, and for whatever reason, our parents like to dress us up in matching outfits. One winter, when I was 3 years old and my brother would have been 5, they bought us both matching red onesies to help us stay warm at night. While living in the house, I used to frequently have bad dreams and night terrors, my brother as well. And one night, after having such a bad dream, I jumped out of bed and ran through the dark house to my parents' bed. I remember the mere act of stepping onto the floor to trek across the dark rooms to my parents' bed was nearly as scary as my nightmares. I felt there were things under the bed and hiding in the shadows, just waiting for me to be alone. In my parents' room, there was a full-length mirror to the left of their bed. I crawled into their bed and hid under the covers, but I had this urge to peek out, and so I poked my head out and scanned the dark room. That's when I saw something. It was standing at the foot of the mirror, staring at me from behind the glass, as if it were a reflection in the mirror. I'm sure it was a duende. It was about 2 feet high, dressed in red, and it wore a Phrygian hat. It had a long white beard and an unusually wide mouth with a sinister grin that showed sharp, spiky teeth. I dared not stare at him too long, so I quickly ducked under the blankets and held them down tight. I waited under the blankets, expecting to feel this creature crawl across the top of the bed and grab me, but nothing happened, and eventually I fell asleep. This whole ordeal was so odd and scary that at first I chose not to share it with anybody. My father was a believer, but my mother was far more skeptical of fairy stories, and I was afraid of what she might say. But then, several days later, or it may have been weeks, I overheard my brother tell the exact same story to our older half-brother. I couldn't believe it. Everything about the story was identical to mine. My brother had a nightmare, got out of bed, and snuck into my parents' room, where he hid under the covers. When he peeked out, he saw a duende with white hair and sharp teeth, dressed in red, staring at him from behind the mirror. I said, "That happened to me too." Our older half-brother didn't believe me. He accused me of lying, of trying to steal my brother's story. He also said my brother had probably seen his own reflection in the mirror in his red onesie. That's why the supposed duende had been dressed in red. I was upset because the experience had felt so real to me and disturbing, and the fact that my brother had the same experience was to me proof positive confirmation that what happened was real. I spoke to my brother alone, the one who'd had the same experience as me later, without our older half-brother around to make fun of us, and we both whispered about it amongst ourselves. We were both certain we did not see ourselves in the mirror, but something else. And we both believed we had seen the same creature, since we both remember its distinct, sinister smile and pointed teeth. As the years and then decades went by, I've wondered about this encounter on and off. It all happened so early in our childhoods that I do often doubt my own memory. But strangely, after this incident happened, my family experienced a series of scarring events, and I sometimes wonder if maybe the Duende's appearance was a warning or omen of what was to come. I won't go into everything that happened, but briefly, my parents divorced, my brother ended up in and out of jail, and I eventually had to walk away from my family completely, moving to a new state for a fresh start. Sadly, the same year that I moved away, my brother died of a drug overdose. So, as adults, before things got so bad that we all went our separate ways, I remember sitting down with my brother and talking about the Duende in the mirror, and he still remembered it, and we both still believed that it really happened. When I was 5, we moved to a new house in Illinois, and right away I remember feeling there was something strange about the place. My room, especially. I became convinced that there was something in there. Then one night, when I was lying in bed, I saw something. There was a tall humanoid creature with grayish skin standing in my closet. It had frightening red eyes with dark sclera and dark unkempt hair. I told my parents what I had seen the next morning and insisted to them it was real, but they didn't believe me. After I'd been pestering them about it and losing sleep, they finally told me the quote unquote monster in my closet was actually a good monster, not a bad monster. I was a kid, so this reassured me. I started putting food out for him and was then able to sleep. I felt after that the thing in my closet became fond of me. I still see him from time to time to this day and feel his presence following me. I still don't know much about him or what he is. I know he's territorial and doesn't like most people, but he seems to protect me. He's extremely quiet usually. He has some of the fairies' specific personality traits, such as a hatred of lies. Honestly, for years it didn't occur to me that this might be a fairy because the fairies in my books look different. He seemed annoyed that I noticed him the first time, but now it's like we're just used to each other. He has a sour disposition and often seems angry, but not really at me. I think fairies can be dangerous, so it's important to be careful when dealing with them. Thanks for watching and happy Halloween! I hope you have a scary fairy night. If you're staying in and looking for a spooky read that will get you in the mood for the holiday, you should definitely check out my now award-winning fairy fantasy novel, The Ghosts of Nothing, if you haven't already. It's a spooky Tim Burton-esque fairy tale, and the last part of it actually takes place during Halloween, so it's a perfect read for this time of year, and it both includes the paranormal and fairies, so you're in for a treat. To learn more about it, all the links are in the description below. If you've already read it and want to learn more about the fairy world I created for my novel and my plans for future books in the series, you can sign up for my writing newsletter, The Shaken Tree, on my website, also linked below. As always, if you have a true fairy encounter story to share, you can check out my website. It has a spot where you can submit your stories, comments, questions, or suggestions. You can also sign up for the mailing list that's dedicated to the channel, Fairy Lights, which is a great way to receive notifications whenever I release a new video straight to your email inbox. Extra special thanks, as always, to all of my supporters on Patreon and anyone who joined the channel. made a one-time donation through PayPal or Coffee, or subscribed as a paid subscriber to one of my mailing lists. I really appreciate you guys so much and the support you are giving this work. If you like this channel, the stories I tell here, and would like to lend your support, please check out my Patreon page and the other support options in the description below. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census, so thanks to everyone who submitted. The stories were edited for dramatic and narration reasons. To read the original Census stories, follow the link in the description to the Fairy Investigation Society website. Don't forget to leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. All these things really help the algorithm and help to spread the channel around, so please don't forget to do that. And hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.